Let's look at clearing variable names, quitting the kernel, referencing previous lines, and using the percent sign. So first of all, one of my rules is that you need a clear global at the beginning of every problem in your assignment. And remember, that's a backtick, which is just below the tilde to the left of the 1 on your keyboard, and then a star, and then the global is in quotes. And when you hit Shift Enter, you're not going to see anything right there, but if I, before that, start typing some variable names, so like x is equal to 1, then I can type x, and I get that. If I type y equals 5, and so on, maybe define a function, f of x equals x squared, then type f. Oh, and I already had x defined as a variable name, so let's make it f of, not y, let's say f of z is z squared. Get that. F of 1 then is going to be equal to 1. It's taking that 1 and squaring it. F of y is 25, and so on. Now, if I hit clear global, watch what happens to all of these names, the x, the y, and the f. They all turn blue. So now, after executing that, if I type x, hit Shift Enter, I just get x as the output, whereas up here I got 1. If I just type y, Shift Enter, I get y. F of z, if I type that, then it doesn't know what that is. So I've cleared out all of the variable names, all of the function names that I had defined up to that point in the document. And I want you to have one of those before every problem so that as the file is being run, all of the variable names that you defined in the previous problem or problems, and any variable names that another student had defined in the file that I had opened before yours, all get cleared out, and we're starting with a fresh slate. I don't want you to have function names or variable names from a previous problem causing issues in a later problem. If you call x again and you forgot that you had defined it, say, to be equal to 1, when I tried to type f of x right here, it didn't work out. So you need to be clearing things out so that you're starting with a fresh slate. Now, occasionally, and this is very rare, you shouldn't need to do this too often, but you can clear out just one particular variable name. So for instance, if I type x equals 1, let's go back and fix that, x equals 1, and y equals 5, again right here. And let's say I want to only clear out the x. I can say clear, put the name x like that, and you'll notice that just the x turned blue, but the y is still equal to 5. So now if I type x, then it just returns x. If I type y, though, it still returns the 5. So that's how we can clear out any variable names. Again, typically, you'll just use a clear global at the beginning of a problem, and if you need a different variable name, then just use a different letter, or you can use multiple letters. So like xx, if I've already used x, I can say xx equals 2, and now the name xx is stored as 2. Sometimes if you are defining a function, I think this often happens if you're trying to use a name that's already a built-in Mathematica command, you can run into a situation where clearing alone doesn't fix things. And if that happens, if you're getting really weird output and you've gone through, you've cleared variables and you're still not sure what's going on, sometimes if you go under Evaluate and then say Quit Kernel Local, click on that, and then say yes, you do want to quit the kernel, and it'll take it a minute. And then you can either go back under Evaluation and say Start Kernel Local again, or you can just execute another line. And if we do that, it's not going to show us anything. But now when I did that, all of the variable names that I had defined get wiped out, and any processes that Mathematica was running in the background will get killed off. And it generally behaves essentially the same as closing Mathematica entirely and then restarting it, except here you don't have to close out the file. You can just quit the kernel and then start it up again, and you essentially get a fresh start. There is a command line command for doing that. I don't want you to put that in your file, though. If you do have to quit the kernel because of some problem, you should go back and fix the problem. Another somewhat related topic is referencing previous lines. So for instance, if let's run this XX line again up here, and then I'll run that one again. If I hit % and then Shift Enter, it's going to return this too. And the % is calling the last thing that Mathematica saw as its output. So for instance, if I come up here and run this y equals 5 line again, and then jump down and evaluate the percent, the last thing that Mathematica output was the 5 from up here. Even though there are these other commands in between the y equals 5 and the percent down here, if I'm running the y equals 5 and then come down to the percent, that's what's going to return. Now, typically your file will be evaluated top down and you're not going to be jumping around like that. So here, if I were just evaluate this notebook, it would see the xx equals 2, typing the xx again, getting that 2 out, and then the percent would return a 2. If you plot a function, so let's say I plot x going from -3 to 3, just a line, get that. If I hit percent, then it will return that previous output. Now, sometimes the percent command is useful. It gives you a quick way of referencing the last thing that you did, but you do need to be careful when you're using it, making sure that you want to always reference the previous line so that when I go back or when the grader goes back and runs your notebook, that it's always going to be that previous line that's being used there. In general, if you need to use something again in the next line, it's much better to give it a name. So for instance, this plot, I could give it the name graph equals plot. You're allowed to assign plots to a name, and then here I can type graph and we get that, and it doesn't matter if I run something else in between, so I can run this line up here again, run this one, come back down, and graph is still defined as that picture. So it's a much better way of referencing something later on than using percent. However, there are situations in which percent can help clean things up, make things a little bit faster. Now, there's also a way to reference output by these line numbers right here, and you should never do that. So if I hit %12, it's going to return that graph. Oh no, it's not %12, it's just percent with a 12 next to it, no brackets on there, and it's going to return that output. Now the issue with that is %12 could change. So notice all these line numbers right here. If I, for instance, let's see, we've got 112 up there, so let's make that 112, shift enter. It doesn't remember what that was because I quit the kernel somewhere along the way here. If I reference this line number, the 112, and then run that line again, notice that the number now changes to 16. So the reference that I have down here, even if the 112 had been working before, now it's not going to work again. So I don't want you referencing specific line numbers because that's going to change depending on what you've been running. It'll change depending on what I've been running. That line number could be in someone else's file if I ran theirs first and then ran yours without restarting Mathematica first, which is very common. I'm not going to close out the program in between opening up each file as I go through and grade. So you should never reference by specific line numbers.